Fred, when I was reading about your 13th record, 13th record.
13,
How does-
really.
not the luckiest of numbers. I read that you called it a spiritual album. What do you mean by that?
I like to think, whether it's totally true or not, in my little mind, I like to think that the songs that I create come from a place, that they have a foundation that are trying to communicate something of value to the audience, because I have such respect for the audience, for the children, parents, grandparents, for the family, that the songs I try and connect with are universal topics that you can listen to and will get, maybe a little part of that seed will get inside of you.
Yeah, because it seems like there is something deeper there. I know that you and I have talked a little bit about this in the past, but I think there are those who perform kids music, and then there's you. You don't strike me as then there's Fred Penner music. Like, I feel like there's something different you're trying to do, maybe something more spiritual, maybe something more intangible you're trying to do in your performances that's different than just kids music. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree, and I think a lot of it came from, certainly from the early part of my career. I had a sister who was a Down syndrome child, as I'm sure you know, and music was a huge part of her life. So as a teenager, watching that happen, and then through high school and university, I worked in residential treatment centers with physically and mentally challenged kids. Music was part of that. And when I started performing live, people would come to me with stories about how my music affected their lives with their families.
But what did you learn through those experiences? Like, what did you learn from working in those places? What did you learn through your sister that you were able to channel into your music?
Yeah, it wasn't about the music specifically. It was about the awareness that the musical seeds can make a difference in the life of that child, of that person. And so I, for whatever reason, I took that to heart and to soul, and so when I started writing songs, I didn't want to just write fluff. I have written some tunes that are a little bit lighter, but I always wanted to go just a little bit deeper into something that may be connected on a spiritual level, on a more personal level.
You know, I think when Caroline just mentioned that when you played the other day at the Toronto club, the Little Lounge, you looked out and there was a bunch of Fred Penner fans and their kids.
Yeah.
But I think even in my generation, and I think I'm kind of on the ground floor of the Fred Penner fandom in the 80s. My parents, who didn't grow up with your music, they got something out of it too. Like, is that something you keep in mind when you write music, that you kind of want the grown-ups, the adults, to get it as well?
I do hope that.
Yeah.
You know, because if the parents don't connect, if they just sort of push it away and plop the kids in front of the box, then they're not part of the process. And I think of the music and the connectivity as a process, as a dialogue. When I'm on stage, it's singing to the kids, it's singing to the parents and the caregivers. And after the show, I hope that they continue that dialogue into their lives, so that. I mean, it's a big task to try and unite the world in music, you know, and that's not what I'm trying to do. But it's feeling the strength of the music and hoping that it does have a unifying effect with the family. 8
years ago, Caroline mentioned she saw you at the Mariposa Folk Festival. I was at that folk festival too.
Were you?
Yeah, my band was as well. That's where I met the Good Lovelies. And the one thing I remember about that is two things. One, you were incredibly gracious, and we were all very excited to meet you. And you took a picture, and you were very kind. However, I'll also say that you did a set, I believe in the evening, called maybe Fred Penner for Grown-Ups, and you got up and you did a lot of old folk songs. You did kind of an adult set. Is that something that's important for you to do every now and then, to get up and get outside the repertoire that you're best known for?
Well, what's interesting is as time has moved on and Fred Penner's Place was taken off the air, and I thought for a while that may be the end of that, and I might just maintain for a period of time. And then the university scene started arriving. Ernie Coombs, Mr. Dress Up, you know, had been doing some university stuff. So I started putting out some feelers and got Pacan to pitch it to the Coca University people. And sure enough, they said, "Oh yeah, well let's give it a try." So I went into bars. Paul and I played, every bar from Victoria to Halifax, and starting at 10 o'clock at night, which is a totally different time frame for me, and many of the same songs. Certainly, The Cat Came Back in Sandwiches, and the songs that they would recognize. But I wanted to bring in tunes that were part of my development. So I threw out some Cat Stevens, some Joni Mitchell, some Gordon Lightfoot. I mean, songs that really were part of my musical development and beginning. And plus a few original songs that I wouldn't normally do in a family concert. Because they talk about sorrow and pain and suffering and the things that we are all connected with.
But what's that? I mean, I remember you singing "Lord, Won't You Buy Me a Mercedes Benz." I think you right. At that performance. But what's that like for you? I mean, getting up there in the evening and playing for this. In this context that really you haven't performed in for decades, in the evening, in the nighttime.
It's the most incredible thing in the world.
What do you mean?
Getting up on stage, first of all, coming out, and sometimes we'll have the video of the opening of Fred Penner's Place will play if they have that capability. Mm-hmm. But when I step on stage, there's this roar. This audience just sort of pours out this energy, and I look out and I see all these adults who have suddenly been reduced to 5 years old, and they're like right to the front of the stage. They are so keen and excited. I did a CMW a few years ago at the Drake.
This is the Canadian Music Week.
Canadian Music Week, at the Drake
in Toronto.
And the Drake is a pretty hip kind of club.
Sure, it is. It's a skinny jean kind of place. Fred.
Exactly.
I'm with you. Yeah.
And at in the basement area, the audience was back. They were 30 feet from the stage, and I got out there and I said, "Come on. No, don't, come on. You can do it." And I gestured for them to come forward, and they were, "All right, is it okay for us to," they were so gentle about approaching that. I didn't want to be too cool and anyway. So they came forward, and we had just a fabulous night. But seeing that generation embrace their youth and going back to a time where they could really connect with music, I mean that's a huge part of our discovery, right?
But I also think that as we get older, we get more hardened, and more importantly, we get more cynical. Like I think what you're describing there is an inability of a generation to come to allow themselves the vulnerability to come closer. And in many ways, what your music reminds us of is a time when perhaps we were the least cynical.
That has crossed my mind. My wife Ray Ellen and I have discussed that, and seeing perhaps what I do as a bit of a balance to the insanity that we all deal with. I mean, once you make it through your teen years and that
dumpster fire
exactly,
is over.
Yeah. There's a few words for that. But once you get to adulthood, and then it's, so what am I going to do for life, for money, for career, and you sort of forget about that purity and that joy that was part of your development. And then at one point, when you're finally at a vulnerable space in your life, you start drifting back and say, what were those things that were important to me? And then it's, I remember this guy in the log. I remember these songs. And part of you just sort of melts a little bit, and you are excited, and this audience seems to be excited about reconnecting.
I want you to pick up those headphones we have nearby there. I don't know where they went. There they are.
Here they are.
Because we had Alex Cuba in the studio recently, and we ended up just talking at the end a little bit about his experience working with you. And Alex didn't grow up with Fred Penner's Place in the same way that I did, and in the same way that a lot of people listening to this did. But this is a clip of him talking about how you made an impression on him during one of your performances at a festival.
Okay. I didn't know who Fred Penner was a few years ago, until I started running into him at festivals, and the people started me, "You don't know Fred Penner?" Oh my God, and then we went to a festival, and I remember him stealing the show.
Oh yeah, he's incredible.
We did like a worship. I mean, it was like a jam at the end of the festival, right? And he got on stage, man, and he started rapping. So like, I'm there, and everybody was like, "Oh my God!"
Yeah,
he's amazing, and I'm very proud to be in his album.
That's Alex Cuba talking about Fred Penner, who, as Fred mentioned earlier, he joined him on his most recent record. Is that true? You got his attention by rapping?
It was a bizarre little thing. We were at in Ear Falls at the Forest something festival in Ontario, sort of north of Kenora, Dryden area. And it was end of an afternoon. He was doing his set, and he said, other performers come up on stage, and so we're singing along with him, and they've got a great groove going. And then other performers, sort of one by one, were stepping up to the microphone, just doing something. It was totally spontaneous, and I don't know what. Hallelujah! I don't know what came over me.
What did you do?
It was just I followed the rhythm. I was into the groove. It was basically looking at the audience and rapping on what I was seeing. Here we are in this beautiful place, and it just poured out of me.
Yeah.
And I was sort of taken off guard because I've never done that before. and Alex sort of looked at me and. He was flying, and the audience was going crazy. I didn't think I stole the show, but it certainly was a memorable moment.
I think what's remarkable about that is that it's not just us who grew up with you, whether it's us on television or your daughter who's here, that you have an impact on. You can get us even when we get a bit older too.
There you go.
Fred, you're going to play another song for us, but before I do, and I know you get this all the time, but as part of a generation that grew up, and is sometimes reminded of those very uncynical moments in a very, very cynical time, I want to thank you so much for your music.
That's kind of you. Thank you.
What's one more song you're going to do? What's it going to be?
It's called Humility.
That's a good one to do. Tell me a little bit about it.
Back in Winnipeg, I wrote songs for a TV series called TP Tales, which is based on Aboriginal culture and spiritual values, where each is related to an animal. Turtle is truth, eagle is love, bear is courage, which is also on this album, Courage. And my wife, Raellen Bodie, and I co-wrote the Courage song, which I'm really proud of. And humility was one of these values, and wolf is humility. And I thought, well, how do you write about humility? And it came down to how you self-awareness, who you feel you are. And so the lyrics sort of fell from that. You're not too big, you're not too small. Whoever you are is best of all. So giving people the power that wherever you go, whatever you are, you have this strength inside of you.
That you were okay. That no matter, like, maybe what you're saying is that if you are happy with yourself, you feel no need to brag. If you're truly happy with yourself, you'll be humble. Is that it?
Yes, I think it was probably one of the most difficult concepts I dealt with, but I like where the song went. It has a nice groove to it, and some nice harmonies to it, and some horn work as well. And Tara Lightfoot came on along with the Good Lovelies. It was a fun song to play, and I'm really excited to share it with you.
Well, this is Fred Penner performing Humility on cue. Thank you so much, Fred.
Thanks, Tom.